just get that going. Well, welcome tonight, everyone. I'm Diana Hammer with Resilient Helena's leadership team, and we invited Patrick Judge, Helena's sustainability coordinator, to speak to us tonight and present Helena's first annual sustainability report, which is pretty awesome. We've had sustainability coordinators in the past, or we had a sustainability coordinator in the past, but that position was grant funded. And so Patrick is a city employee and he's not reliant on soft money. So that's a really great step that the city of Helena has taken, and a really good investment. And just by way of background, in 2017, the City Commission signed on to the Paris Climate Accord. And with that action, they also, at the same time, they created the Citizens Conservation Board. And the charter of the Citizens Conservation Board is to advise the city on climate action. And one of the first recommendations the Conservation Board made was the city really needs to invest and hire a sustainability coordinator. So a year ago, this month, the city wisely hired Patrick Judge as the city's first city employee sustainability coordinator. So we're really thrilled to have you here tonight, Patrick, to talk about the actions that the city of Helena is taking to create a more sustainable and resilient city. So I will be monitoring the chat and while Pat is talking, and he's built in several kind of natural break points in his presentation. So we'll pause periodically and there'll be time for questions. So you don't need to remember your questions until the very end. All right, so if you have questions, you can either type them in the chat and we'll address them at that time, or you can unmute yourself and just ask the question. All right.
Great. Thank you, Diana.
You're welcome.
And greetings, everyone. I'm equally thrilled to be here, to be invited to address this group. And I'm going to try to share some slides here. Can everyone see those? Thank you. All right, great. Yeah, so as Diana mentioned, it was 1 year ago tomorrow, actually, that I started my work with the city. It's a half-time permanent position. And so I'm really eager to kind of share my findings from this first year and reflections, and really lucky to have had the great support of city manager. We've had a couple of them since I started, the city commissioners, and city staff generally, and Citizen Conservation Board members and subcommittee members and the public who've all really engaged this theme. So yeah, we're also lucky to have a lot of subject matter expertise on the call tonight. So if I get stuck, I'm sure someone can answer questions that people have. And so I guess we'll just jump right in. So the sustainability report was something that was actually requested as part of the 2009 Climate Action Plan, among their 44 recommendations made over 10 years ago now, as was my position and the creation of the Citizen Conservation Board. And so this was the report that was prepared, like I said, 10 years ago, 11 years ago, by the Climate Change Task Force that was appointed by the commission, met for about a year and a half, produced this study, 200 pages long, like I said, 44 recommendations, kind of broken down into the areas of energy, water, waste, implementation, and those kind of same natural breakpoints are reflected in the Citizen Conservation Board subcommittees, and also kind of the chapters in my current report. So let's see. So what's happened since that time? Just kind of a year by year sustainability timeline. You know, when you write a big report like that, you're always nervous that it's just going to sit on a shelf and collect dust. And And so this report was taken seriously by the city staff. And even though they didn't have a sustainability coordinator for a while, the staff actually did a pretty good job, I think, of paying attention to it and making strides kind of year by year. So this is just a quick summary of those, just one or two per year. There's an appendix in my draft report that has a much more detailed list. But 2010 complete streets policy ordinance that was put into place to make sure that new construction projects were bike walk friendly, for example, and sidewalks and things of that nature. 2011, this is one of my favorite projects, the water source heat pump at the 10-mile water treatment plant allowed them to actually disconnect from Northwestern Energy's natural gas supply completely. So they derive the heat and the cooling for that facility simply from the thermal energy in the water itself that's being treated there. That's pretty innovative. 2014, some really progressive incentives were adopted to help facilitate homeowners, businesses interested in renewable energy to help make it faster and a little cheaper to get through that process. And that work was actually recognized a few years later. It'll come up on the next slide by the National Renewable Energy Lab. It won Helena an award for that. 2015, this was really exciting. The zero interest renewable energy loan program for residences allows people to finance systems for 10 years, up to $12,000 at literally 0% interest on those loans that are paid back right on your property tax bills. And so that's enough money for a typical 4-kilowatt solar array, rooftop solar. And then when that money gets paid back over time, it's a revolving loan program. It gets loaned out again. It was originally funded with a settlement, I think, from a telecom dispute. And some more money was put in this year. And it was very popular and very uniquely Helena. I'm not aware of any other Montana town, at least Missoula or Bozeman or anyone that has anything quite like that. And that same year, we acquired our first plug-in hybrid electric vehicle that's used every day, every work day for the city-county mail route. And you can see it out there by the city-county building charging in that north parking lot. The next year, the public-private partnership with Helena Recycling was formed to provide citizens curbside recycling services. We had the Blue Bag program that wasn't super popular. And so this really kind of accelerated that. We're up to, I think John Hilton's operation has 1,300 accounts now among the residences of Helena, and he's got a lot of other commercial accounts and outlying areas that he serves. And so the city's part of that is to provide the bins that you use. It's a source separated 4-bin system. And every other week, they come by your home to collect that. So they have very low contamination rates. And the city also kicks in $4.20, I think it is now. It used to be $5 each month. And the homeowner pays $8 per month. And that just appears right on your water bill. So that's been working out pretty well. We still think, there's something like 11,000 households in Helena. So, we're over 10%, but it'd be great to bump that up further. That same year, the city implemented, as was recommended in the climate action plan, tiered water rates, which is an incentive for water conservation. And it means simply that once you bump up during those summer watering months into higher usages, it triggers a higher rate. You're paying more per unit of water. So it sends a strong signal, incentive to encourage people to keep an eye on that, make sure they're not watering the sidewalk and the street, and that they're putting, maybe looking at smaller amounts of turf or drought resilient kinds of turf. So the next year, as Diana mentioned, the commission really kind of wanted to revive the emphasis on these programs by passing a resolution. This was kind of after the US had pulled out of the Paris Agreement, that the city of Helena did endorse the Paris climate goals, and that they were going to take additional steps as outlined by that climate action plan, including the establishment of that citizen conservation board. And also that year was a resolution endorsing the return of passenger rail to the city of Helena. And that's very timely now. There's a major effort afoot statewide to bring back the Hiawatha route, that kind of the southern route, in addition to that northern Amtrak route that we have. So Lewis and Clark County has yet to join on to that effort, but hopefully that'll happen. And the city commission has taken that position in support of it. So 2018, the Citizen Conservation Board convened in January. And one thing to note is that they only have a 5-year lifetime. And so come January 2023, they have to be specifically reauthorized by the commission in order to continue that work. I think that's actually a good thing, because it's the board's been very attentive to that timeline and feeling the pressure to make sure it's getting good work done. A quick shout out to Diana Hammers, not only on that board, but was just elected the new chair of that board. And I think Mark Judeman is on the call as well, another Resilient Helena steering team member, and he was just elected a vice chair. So we're in very capable hands at the Citizen Conservation Board. So I mentioned the Soul Smart Silver, that was that National Renewable Energy Lab recognition. And I think that's the best that anyone's done in Montana. I think we're ahead of some communities like Missoula on that. And generally, Missoula, Bozeman are kind of the leaders in the state, but it's nice to pull ahead of them occasionally in certain areas. So then, like, as has been said, November 2019, I got to work. And then shortly thereafter, the commission in February of 2020 unanimously passed a 100% clean electricity for the entire community goal to be reached by 2030, with an interim goal of 80% by 2025. So that sounds super ambitious, and it is ambitious, but we are starting at a pretty good position. We're already at 60%, thanks to our legacy hydro system that Northwestern gets a lot of its power from, and quite a bit of Montana wind that's been developed already. So I think it is an achievable goal, but I'm gonna have to work hard to get there at the same time. And then on June 29th, the city commission adopted an update to the growth policy, and this was a major undertaking, lots of public outreach and lots of really good sustainability language in there, from talking about zero waste, solid waste reduction targets, climate goals, things like that. So that's available on the city website and is a great policy document. It has a lot of impacts in all of the city's operations, really. And that same night was when the commission adopted its fiscal year 2021 budget, and there were a number of sustainability related items in there, including funding for a 50 kilowatt solar electric system at a city owned facility. So again, another recommendation from 2009. To date, we have very little renewables as a city government. We have a small 3.5 kilowatt system at our wastewater treatment plant, and we have some solar lights down there by Centennial Park, and a solar powered aeration system up at Chessman Reservoir, but really kind of small niche applications. And this would be our first major. That's the largest allowed by Montana's net metering law. And we've also applied for co-funding from Northwestern Universal System Benefits Program, which is something that all Montanans pay into on their energy bills. It's was set up by the legislature. So we're hoping to get a $50,000 grant from them in the next few months to get that project done this coming year. And then of course the draft report. So the new city manager, Rachel Harlow Schalk, asked me to emphasize that the report is not quite ready for release. It's in draft form still. She needs to review it still. The commission needs to review it still, but I certainly got her enthusiastic support for making this presentation and sharing the preliminary findings. So we've already talked about Citizen Conservation Board and its role, its membership. Meetings, of course, are public, open to the public every month, second Thursday. Active subcommittees on energy transportation, which Mark Judeman heads up. Water, Diana's very involved in that. Waste and recycling, Denise Barber and Ann Brodsky are chairing that group. They've been super active. And then there's been a lot of talk and kind of initial steps towards a fourth subcommittee or team on outreach and education. That's really critically important to advancing any of these objectives. So there's a link to the CCB website, and right at the top of that website, the climate action plan is available. And that's going to be kind of the go-to place where I post any work product that I have, like this sustainability report. So why don't we take a quick break and see if people have questions at this point?
Yeah, please feel free to pop something into the chat or unmute yourself, and we'll take a minute or two here.
Hey Pat, it's Matt Thompson. I was just curious what the timeline is for formalizing the sustainability report, and if there will be any public input into that.
Great question. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so our new city manager is just getting her legs under herself. She just hit her 30-day mark. And so we've had one Zoom call. I'm supposed to meet with her tomorrow. So that'll be a topic of conversation. And we don't have anything established yet, but certainly by year end, I'm hoping this will all be off my desk. And so, and yes, I would think there would be a presentation to the commission that would of course be public, and solicit, give some time for some public feedback, and already passed most of it, all but the last chapter, by the Citizen Conservation Board for their feedback.
Thanks, Matt. Any other questions? All right, why don't we proceed?
So chapter 2 of the report, it's just 5 chapters. Chapter 2 is just an update on where we stand with the 44 recommendations envisioned in 2009, and divided them up into 4 categories. So 13 of them are totally checked off the list and done and underway, or basically complete. And so we've already talked about 3 of those. 21 more are underway. So for example, the renewable energy project we talked about, and that's been funded by the city, but it still has a ways to go before it's in the ground. There was a goal in there to reduce water use per capita from 175 is what they had back in 2008, 2009, to 100 gallons per day. And we're making progress toward that, but we haven't gotten there yet. So we've reduced down to 154 gallons per day last year. And Diana's team is working hard on how to keep making progress on that. That's just total water processed by the city divided by total population. So that includes our share of everything that's going to businesses and city parks and institutions. And the solid waste diversion, so the amount that's going to recycling or composting, we were hoping to get from 14% to 35%, which is actually now the US average. but we're still lagging behind there. We've come a certain ways, but quite a ways to go yet. We're about 22%. And then a number of other recommendations that, some of them really, if we were to write the report again today, they might not be included at all. The U.S. and statewide policy on biomass and biofuels, a lot of that's kind of been reconsidered. Is converting a bunch of U.S. corn crops to ethanol, really a wise approach. And so I think it kind of makes sense that the city didn't really do all. I mean, there was even recommendations in there to convert to some fluorescent lighting, which at the time was more efficient than what we were using, but now it's of course all LEDs, and no one would make that recommendation anymore. So reducing plug loads. This is just making sure we're getting Energy Star, computer equipment, office equipment, things like that. I just haven't had the chance to really review the purchasing and procurement policies at the city to see, but I suspect that we do have pretty good practices in that area, and technology just naturally is doing a pretty good job evolving to lessen those loads. But turning to water, this is a graph of Helena's water supply for, I guess, more than 10 years now. And Helena is a pretty rapidly growing community. It's not Bozeman, but it's booming pretty good. And it's encouraging to see that, they've held the line on pretty much maintaining its water use has not gone up. And in last couple years, it looks to be on a downward trend. And I really feel that in 2020, that's going to drop significantly due to projects that have already been completed, but haven't yet shown up in that data. So this involves things like replacing 100-year-old pipelines that were extremely leaky and lining reservoirs. And so just in the last year or two, I'm told that we're saving another 20% reduction here. So I can't wait to see that data next year. So this is looking at more water data kind of from a different view, which is the variation within the year. So it's highly dependent upon the time of year, and that's just those summer months. It spikes due to irrigation. There was a study done looking at, well, who are the biggest users of City of Helena water? And it was ourselves, actually. Our city parks were very high up there. And so there's been some really interesting progress made with converting from treated potable water to just well water at Women's Park and Hill Park, and next on the list is Waukesha Park. So they're going to continue to try to get around to the parks and continue that trend. But yeah, it almost triples the amount of water use in the summer, and that has a really negative effect. I mean, we are so blessed in this community to have incredibly resilient supplies of water from 3 different sources. Number one being the 10-mile treatment plant. If you're going out Highway 12 west and you see the turnoff to Remini Road, it's right there near that intersection. And that's all gravity fed system. So it doesn't require any electricity for pumping or filtering that water. And it's also very high quality. So very minimal chemicals need to be treated. And that plant has enough capacity to meet our needs for all of those off-peak months. But during those hot summer months, we turn to our second source, which is the Missouri River Treatment Plant. But as you all know, that's downhill from all the reservoirs in Helena. And so that's, they have massive, can't remember how many horsepower each of those pumps are to bring all of that water uphill, and it has to be treated more. It's much more expensive to the city. So that would be, the ultimate vision is to not have to really turn that plant off to turn it on during those summer months. We also have a very large, high quality aquifer with water rights, city water rights associated with that could be tapped into. So we're really the envy of Bozeman and Billings and Great Falls, lots of communities that depend on just a single plant. And so if something were to go wrong with one of our sources, we have other options. All right, turning to waste. This is the tonnage that flows through the transfer station. And so the red line is the sum of the green line and the blue line. The blue line being the solid waste that's diverted for recycling, the commodities. And as you can see, there was some, growth for the kind of the first 10 years there, and then it really flattened out, disappointingly. And most of the growth that we've seen in our diversion rate has come from composting instead. So they started up that compost operation out at the landfill, and I'm sure you've all probably taken your branches and leaves and lawn clippings to be composted. So the story might be a little bit better than this, because this does not include that which is collected by Helena Recycling, for example. That doesn't flow through the transfer station. So, or people who bring their recyclables straight to Pacific Steel. So some more sophisticated analysis would have to be done to really show the full picture. So that was tons. This is a more common metric, which is the diversion rate, just the percent that's being used or kept out of the landfill. And that, as I said before, has been kind of growing slowly, mostly due to that composting. But we're still, nowhere near that 35% that we'd like to be. So that was chapter 2, another logical stopping point. There's burning question.
Hey, Pat, it's Matt Thompson. I was just curious, what impact is there from climate impacts like wildfires and so forth on the aquifer for the 10-mile plant? And is that a risk that needs some sort of mitigation strategy or attention, perhaps?
It is indeed. And yeah, that area up above Remini is certainly fire prone. There's been a lot of attention to that with Forest Service proposals and then lawsuits against those proposals. And then the city and county put in friend of the court briefs on the topic. And we had the good fortune of having a tour of that facility and learned that they actually have kind of like 5 straws. So it's not a single drainage that they get it from. It's 5 different mini drainages up there. So that's good, but yeah, it's a definite risk. And so they've tried to, do some mitigation to reduce that risk, but it's only going to get worse, I'm sure, as it gets hotter and drier.
Yeah, that's an interesting topic, kind of a double-edged sword when you talk about conservation and doing fuel reduction strategies and timber harvests and so forth.
Exactly. The 2009 plan actually envisioned bringing some of that deadwood down for a biomass generator at the 10-mile plant. So that never happened, but.
Patrick, there's a question in the chat from Kelly. With sustainability, do ranch owners have the option to have rain barrels for their needs?
Rain barrels for, I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
For their needs. So I guess what she's asking, when Kelly, correct me if I'm, yeah, for their water needs, right? So can ranch owners put rain barrels in to collect water?
Yeah, to my knowledge, I think a lot of people in town do that, kind of gather water off their roofs and use it for the gardens. And are you going to be touching on that in your upcoming series, water conservation series, Diana?
Yes, yeah, just briefly, the water committee of the conservation board is preparing a 4-part workshops, well, a series of 4 workshops to talk about water conservation indoors and outdoors. And one one of the options for us is to collect water off our roofs in rain barrels. So yes, we will be.
Excellent.
And then there's another question from Denise.
Can you guys hear me?
Oh, just barely.
Can you hear me now?
Yep,
Sure.
much better. Thank you.
So Pat, if you could go back to that slide on the diversion of solid waste.
Oops.
So as we know, the compost that the transfer station separates out, like the brush and all, that does end up back in the landfill as part of their cover. So I'm just wondering if the diversion rate is higher than it really is, given that that material is ultimately not diverted from the landfill.
Yeah, my understanding is that some of it is used not for the alternative daily cover, I don't think, but for the final capping when they're done with the cell. So projects like that, but also other city projects with parks and other departments. So they have that agreement with, again, another public-private partnership with a third-party business that does the screening and helps with the processing, and we don't pay them for that, but they get to keep half of it. And so that half, I think, mostly ends up being sold off as pretty high quality compost to nurseries and farmers. And so I think you're right that maybe this is overstating it a little bit, but I think a lot of it is going to kind of the intended, expected outcome.
If I could just add, the landfill, the operators at the landfill would have to provide some sort of cover. And so I think this, in my opinion, taking some of this compost material and using that as the final landfill cover is actually a beneficial use of this material rather than having the city having to acquire that material somewhere else. So I'm not sure what it does to the diversion rate, but it is a useful, a good use of that material.
Yeah, and they that process, I think they take some of the, at least during certain times of the year, some of the biosolids from the wastewater treatment plant as part of that process.
And Cora has a comment in the chat. Daily cover with compost is still better for carbon sequestration than dirt. And the alternative daily cover that Pat mentioned it's actually a tarp that they pull over. They've gotten permission from DEQ to, in the way they operate the landfill, to cover with the tarp. So they actually reduce the amount of space taken up in the landfill by not having to cover with compost or dirt every day. So that's a nice innovation that the city and county are doing.
Great. So jumping ahead to chapter 3, the 2009 plan also included a energy use inventory and greenhouse gas assessment. But that whole plan was really focused internally on city government operations. But it was really encouraging. What we found at that time between 2001 2007 is that we were actually on a downward trend already due to some really innovative work done in facilities and with water treatment and wastewater treatment. The water treatment related things are really huge electricity users, so they make a big difference. And so wanted to update to see where we're at, and we had goals around that in the 2009 plan. So this was a 20% reduction from 2001 to 2007 in total energy use by the city government. And we thought one goal could be to just keep that rate of reduction, but we figured we probably already got some of the lowest hanging fruit, and it might be harder to get the next 20%. So made it 13 years to get to the next 20%. It had a nice ring, 20% by 2020, under 2007 levels. So that's the blue line here. And let's see. So this is our actual, why isn't this looking right to me? I'm sorry, skipped a slide. Okay, so this is the energy slide. And same thing, as I said, 20% reduction. Blue line is 20% goal. here's where we landed last year. Was just 4% less than we used in 2007. So not nearly as good as what we wanted, but still on a slight downward trend. And I should say that I'm sure there's fairly large error bars around all of this stuff. It's not an exact science. It's there's lots of changing protocols and software packages and everything in the last 13 years, but kind of did my best effort. And I worked really hard on this, so I knew it from back in 2009. So I think it's pretty accurate. Hope so. But on the carbon front, our carbon emissions, even though our energy wasn't quite successful, it looks like our carbon is successfully below. It's a 28% reduction. And so how could that be? And the answer is that we've seen tremendous improvements that we can't really take credit for at the city, but just in the mix of power sources on the electrical grid in the Pacific Northwest region. And so that comes from, wind power development, from hydro upgrades to get more production out of the dams. It comes from moving away from coal-fired generation. So that's been really impressive. The carbon intensity of the grid has improved by about 25%. And I did just use regional numbers because that's what was used in 2001, 2007. But going forward, we'll use Northwestern Energy specific numbers. And we are seeing, similar kinds of reductions on the Montana system as well, locally with our power. That's a graph that shows that 25% reduction in carbon intensity in the Pacific Northwest. The Northwest Power Pool is what the region's called. So how does all of that translate into taxpayer dollars? So the reductions that we've seen, again, they were more dramatic from 2001 to 2007, but still another 4% reduction in energy use. Total, this is millions of BTU, so it includes electricity, natural gas, transportation fuels, all of that stuff. So our energy bill last year was $1.8 million. And at those same prices, what we would have paid if we'd used energy at the rate we did in 2001, city government, was 2.4 million. So that represents a savings to the taxpayer of over $500,000, over $600,000 each year. Super impressive. Almost seems unbelievable. And the major footnote to that is the reason why it's perhaps overstated is because that does not include the cost of the equipment and upgrades that made those savings possible. But all of those energy conservation projects certainly are, meet cost effectiveness tests. They pay for themselves quite rapidly, and they do represent pretty substantial savings to the taxpayers. All right, so then moving on to chapter 4, which is to finally broaden this out to the Helena community. So contacted Montana Department of Transportation and got the fuel use figures. Contacted Northwestern to get the electricity, natural gas sold in Helena for that year, for 2019. And this is the result. So if you divide it out by the 30,000 or so residents that we have, came out to 18.6 metric tons per person. And that's actually pretty good. I think it's a little below the national average, which kind of surprised me because we have a difficult climate in Montana, obviously. But this also within the city limits, we're not really reflecting our share of manufacturing and industrial processes and a lot of things like that. So anyways, we're basically in line with, the rest of the country there. But note that the figure 614,000 metric tons is about 100 times, I guess it's 90 times greater than the city government itself, which was this slide. So that's like 6,000 instead of 600,000. And it's just kind of interesting to break it down to see that the city government itself uses a lot of electricity for those water treatment plants. All of the street lighting is included in that as well. Not as much transportation as a percentage. We look at homeowners, businesses, that's more, a bigger share there. The community reflects really what the model thinks that the landfill represents in terms of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions, methane emissions, things like that. So that's a bigger sector when you're looking at the community. So, it was a great place to start, to lead by example, to get our own house in order at the city. But it represents only about 1% of our carbon footprint in this community. It represents about 3% of the electricity usage. But we're really not going to move the needle very much unless we engage the broader community. The final chapter was just looking forward. I like this photo because it brings together a lot of the city's objectives. This is a housing project, Broadwater Village, affordable housing project. It's just off of Henderson by the railroad bridge there to the west. And we have a lot of housing, low-income housing projects around town that incorporated solar. I was really bummed that the new Red Alder didn't for some reason, which is just north of this project. But I'm hoping to reach out to RMDC and get those discussions going again, and just a win-win. I think some of these had USB funding and there was other funding sources available for that. So on the energy side, ongoing energy efficiency projects. My favorite recent story was the $5,000 per month we're saving just in the parking division at the parking garages due to LED lighting improvements compared to a year ago. We received funding both through DEQ with a grant and also in the city budget to install 3 electric vehicle charging stations at parking garages around town and at the Capital T transit bus stop facility. Those will, they got delayed this year, but we're hoping to get those in this coming summer. I mentioned the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority. There's 11 counties that have signed on to this of the 23 along the route, including neighboring counties like Broadwater and Jefferson. So I really hope Lewis and Clark becomes a part of that. The 50 kilowatt solar project is looking like it will be installed at the fleet maintenance shop on East Lyndale. And, this ambitious resolution mentioned earlier, the initial thought was maybe to pursue some legislation modeled after a bill that passed the Utah legislature, was signed into law in 2019 to enable these kinds of municipal clean and electricity goals. That seems less likely given the current composition of the incoming legislature. Kind of a fallback from that is an interlocal agreement we're working on with City of Bozeman, City of Missoula, and Missoula County. An RFP went out today representing those 4 communities to hire a consultant to help design a green tariff. So this would be to develop new renewable projects that would serve these municipal loads, and then hopefully our residents and businesses and institutions in town as well. So that would not require legislation. That would just be something we would bring to the Public Service Commission. And Northwestern has been a partner on that. We think we can work with the utility on that one. So emerging projects. hoping to move forward with much more sophisticated software to help the city track its energy accounts, make my life easier for preparing these reports, but also would send us alerts if something wasn't functioning properly. We could respond to it more quickly and reap savings just through monitoring. And then I think there's probably going to be an RFP this year as well, request for proposals for an energy performance contracting firm. So this was done at the county, a $1.6 million project for Lewis and Clark County that touched on most, if not all, of their buildings. It's basically a financing mechanism where the local government doesn't have to pay anything up front, but the contractor gets paid over time through the savings on the energy bills. And it's a way to kind of move faster with these well-established, national firms that have a lot of experience in this area. And then have not done a ton yet on the whole topic of fleet and transit. There's been some good funding available through DEQ that was part of the Volkswagen settlement when they were found that they were cheating on their emissions testing. And so that helped fund, like I said, the electric vehicle charging stations. But they also have grants for swapping out old diesel buses, and it could be anything. I mean, they make electric vehicles for all kinds of things, garbage collection trucks and street sweepers, and even our trolley would be a symbolically great conversion to electric. So our committees have talked a little bit about building codes too. That's more of a state process, and the state this fall is in the process of updating the statewide energy related building codes. But there's some incentives that municipalities can provide to builders to exceed those standards to reach higher levels of efficiency. Okay. This was a shot, I think Matt Thompson sent this photograph to me of a recently completed project at the Park County High School. It's right about 50 kilowatts or just a little bit bigger. So that's what we're looking at, that we hope to get at the city shop this coming year. I thought it was just a great visual. Water conservation, the Citizen Conservation Board Committee is going to be rolling out those workshops that Diana talked about, continuing the work with the city infrastructure on the pipelines and the lining of the reservoirs, things like that. Also hoping to improve the software for billing. You can call the city now and get your water bills paperless, pay them online. But it doesn't show your past usage history. It's not super sophisticated. It doesn't have any social norming that shows you kind of what your neighbors are doing to help encourage you to save water. Revisiting our tiered water rates to see if they can optimize conservation while not negatively impacting revenues for those operations. And we've talked about some tree planting projects as a possibility to work on. So that's just an image of that 10-mile treatment plant. So 4,400 feet, and in most of town is down 300 feet below that. The gravity fed is great. Some communities like Portland have tapped into those water lines to put little micro hydro turbines to get some electricity out of that. And we're not sure that that would actually work for us, but worth taking a look at. And then the Waste and Recycling Committee has been super active. They meet just about every week. And looking at that old hierarchy, I'll come back to that previous slide, but far more valuable than having a good recycling operation is reducing the need to recycle in the first place. And so, starting with source reduction and then reuse of materials. You talk to the solid waste division staff and they just tell you how many recyclables come through the transfer station pit, or furniture that's in perfectly usable condition. So that upstream is a priority, then midstream, one thing I used to really enjoy was a Boxing Day event. It went for 15 straight years in Helena, hosted at a couple different locations. I think at least 3 different locations, churches and Carroll College one year. Just a massive community swap day. And they tell stories at the transfer station. They try to have a swap area, but people got in fisticuff encounters, and it was violating our liability requirements. And so we have to figure a new way to partner with thrift stores or the Restore to help divert that stuff. Diana's really excited about prospect for a waste audit to get a good scientific assessment of what exactly is going through our waste stream. So there's some possibility for funding of that this next fiscal year. And universal curbside. So right now, people who kind of want to do the right thing are being penalized for it. They're having to pay, it's, not a ton, but it's $8 extra a month. And really a better model is if it's just in everyone's solid waste assessment on their property tax. And then, you might as well make use of it because you're paying for it anyways. And, just ramp that up to a much higher level. Whether it's continuing to contract with Helena Recycling or someone like that, or bringing it in-house has been a bit of a debate as well. But so there's been this proposal for a study or strategic plan that would hire a third-party consultant to look at those options. But maybe, what Missoula did is they started with a commission resolution for zero waste by 2050, which is really a technical term. It means actually 90% diversion. And then, their work is kind of flowed from that, their waste audit that they're doing and home resource partnership and all of the many good things that they do. So, and then just outreach and education, making sure that there's recycling bins everywhere you go. It's pretty basic. At the airport, at Carroll College, at hotels, at the schools, at school events. People talk about after a football game or something, just the overflowing bins of recyclables along with the other trash that should not be trash. Okay, just about done with the slides. So this was just a chart I put together yesterday, showing what some of the waste reduction goals in various municipalities are. And, this is from the climate action plan, that 35% by 2020, and we're actually down here at 22% or so. And here's Missoula at 90% by 2050. Some of these California cities, they have advantages to just, closer to markets. It's easier for them to ramp up, with the densities that they're dealing with, and just cultural issues too. And so they're, but some of them have, I think San Francisco is exceeding 80% diversion now.
Stuck.
So pretty impressive.
Sitting on my thing.
And then this is final slide, just looking at planning. Is it time to draft a whole new climate action plan? It's been quite a while. Or a resilience plan, or just, couch it more broadly as a sustainability plan. And then just lots of platforms for doing that, that the CCB is looking at. We've worked with ICLEI historically and pay them $600 a month for use of their software, their modeling software, and access to technical review teams and things like that. But there's other options out there. Yeah,
Patrick, isn't it $600 a year?
Outside.
I'm sorry. Thank you for catching that.
Yeah.
$600 per year, yes.
Yeah.
She's over there.
And yeah, I think the lead for cities we were looking at was maybe $850.
They're very needy animals.
880. Yeah. All right, there you have it.
Well, thank you, Patrick. We'll open it up to questions. So if folks want to, that was a lot of really good information, and hopefully you've learned some things that maybe you didn't know about the city of Helena. And I did see a question from Mike McConnell asking are these accomplishments being publicized? And I don't know if you'd like to talk about that, Patrick.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't think the city has done a great job of bringing attention to all the good work that's been done and being done, and we had a public information officer that Rebecca Connor. She was doing a great job with that, but that position's been vacant for a while now, so hopefully that'll be filled soon, and that'll help, because it's actually in the purpose statement that the Citizen Conservation Board adopted, just really stressing the importance of that outreach and education. And
I guess I would just jump in too and say that each of the subcommittees of the Conservation Board has talked about the need for outreach and education on water, on energy, on waste. So it's really fundamental to the Conservation Board's work too. There's a note from Denise. Excellent presentation. Thank you, Pat. I think we all would echo that. And she's wondering if you could do a guest editorial, I'm assuming in the IR, to tout the achievements thus far in the sustainability report.
That's a great idea. I'd be happy to put that together, pending approval from my new boss, of course.
And along those lines, something else we've talked about is talking to the IR and seeing if we could get a regular periodic column in the paper to share some of these opportunities with the Helena community.
Hey, Pat, it's Matt Thompson again. I just wanted to say thanks for a great presentation. And I was curious, given the time limited nature of the Citizen Conservation Board and their current sunset date of 2023, what are some of the major things that you'd hope to accomplish, and what does success look like, and what are some of the biggest barriers to getting there in your mind?
Yeah, so you might have picked up on that, that the chapter 5 is the chapter that's not quite complete, and right now as it stands, it's kind of that looking forward piece is kind of just a brainstorming exercise. One thing that the Citizen Conservation Board is planning is a retreat in December to put together their 2-year plans on what they would like to see in each of those committees. And so that'll be some great feedback. And then, just trying to, some goals are in place. There's really great action items that Michael McConnell has with the growth policy that are specifically assigned to sustainability coordinator and others in public works and all the departments. And so those things are out there. The 100% clean electricity goals out there. Some of the boxes that we haven't yet checked on the 2009 climate action plan. So that 35% diversion rate goal is in place already. And so those are some of the things I'd love to make progress on.
Excellent, thanks.
While you're thinking of your next question, I would encourage you, if you're interested, to attend the Conservation Board meeting on December 10th. That Pat had mentioned it earlier in the slides, but we meet at 4:30 on the second Thursday, and the topic, or one of the presentations that week, or for that meeting, is going to be Lead for Cities and Lead for Communities. And if you want to learn more about what that is, I'm going to encourage you to join us for our meeting. They're open to the public, all via Zoom.
Yep. Yeah, I think a lot of people are familiar with LEED for buildings. Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design is that rating system. So you can get LEED Silver, LEED Gold, I think LEED Platinum maybe. But they have a similar kind of framework for municipalities that you can aspire to, that measures a whole number of sustainability items. So it looks like maybe a couple questions on,
Yeah.
do you want to assign them, Diana?
Well, most of them are compliments saying thank you, great presentation. Peyton has a comment or a question. Are there collaboration efforts between the city of Helena and other cities in Montana to achieve similar goals? Maybe you could talk about the work with Bozeman and Missoula.
Yeah, so probably not quite weekly, but maybe every other week, I really get to benefit from conference calls or Zoom calls with kind of my counterparts in Bozeman and Missoula. So Natalie Meyer is a sustainability manager in Bozeman, and that's a full-time position. And I believe they just funded a second FTE down there. I don't believe they've hired it yet, but she's been in that position quite a while, has a lot of great insight. And then in Bozeman, Chase Jones has that position with the city. And same thing, can't say enough positive about Chase or about Diana Mineta, who is the county of Missoula's sustainability person. And I believe city of Missoula actually did hire a second person, and the county is about to. So they're all moving up to 2 FTEs, and that might be one budget request that we look at, is adding another half-time to our sustainability office. Part of the reason I think it ended up as half-time was because there was, and this kind of touches on another question was asked about city county. There was the possibility that the county, Lewis and Clark County, would fund the other half, and then they decided not to go in that direction. But ironically, in the early years, it was that Recovery Act funding after the Great Recession that was a grant that had a sustainability coordinator that was shared by the city and county. And then the county actually moved forward after that first year and had a sustainability coordinator for several years. That was, I think, Energy Corps person. And they did some great work. 2 or 3 people had that position. So I would love to reestablish, those relationships with the county, and just honestly haven't had time to do that outreach. I've sat down with a few people, but it's harder in COVID, not wandering around the city county building as much anymore. So.
All right. And any other questions?
I like Cora's comment about Zoom, and I agree. So I'm really eager to do the analysis for next year. So again, I think we're going to benefit from actions that weren't necessarily our own, but I think there's going to be a significant reduction in carbon emissions associated with, employee commute and just occupancy of city buildings. And so, I think back in April, they said it was like a 13% reduction nationally in carbon emissions from the year previous. So I do hope that some of those changes will persist in terms of, people traveling long distances to conferences and things like that.
Yeah, I think there are many opportunities for us to rethink our old way of doing business. Okay, last call for questions. Okay, I'm going to post in the chat here just a reminder that we will be posting this recorded discussion on the Resilient Helena webpage, and I put the link to the website in the chat. And so thank you all so much for your attention, your participation. And we also have a Facebook group called Resilient Helena. If you want to join that, we periodically post things around resiliency and reminders about upcoming events like this. And if you support, another thing I mentioned in the chat is if you support these kind of sustainability efforts, please let our elected officials know, because when, they may hear other perspectives, but please, if you like what we're trying to do, please do let them know. Oh, and Denise, good. She also put a plug in for the Zero Waste Helena Facebook page as well. So yeah, good point, Denise, thanks. All right, any closing comments, Patrick?
No, just thanks so much to you and the Resilient Helena team and everyone who attended.
All right, well, thanks everybody. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Good night.